It started. All right. Hi, good afternoon, folks. Thank you so much for joining me this evening. And as you know, we're going to be visited by the Minister of Finance. He is going to answer a couple questions from me about budget, about the public back and forth between himself and the Auditor General, and of course about Forex issues. And in between, I'm going to try and find out what are his um, plans for his political future. Hopefully, he will allow me to ask some of those questions, and he'll answer. So, without yes, now let me check to see who's here. Right. Hi. Evening. Hi, Sheldon. Hi, Brian. Hi, Empress. Oh, volume low. Right. There we go. It's nice and loud now. It should be very loud now because I just raised it all the way up. So, hi. Good evening to everybody. And let me get it started because I know that the minister has a very tight schedule this week coming. So let me bring him in. Where have I? There we go. Right. Hi. Good evening, Minister Imbert. Thank you
Hello.
so much for joining us and for agreeing to have
Good
this
evening. Are you
conversation.
sure? Are you hearing me?
Yes, I am hearing you, but I will be the first to say that the audio sounds a little distorted on your end.
Well, it's the best I can do.
Okay, well, we'll work with it. The audience seems to be, happy that you are here, distorted audio or not. So let me jump straight into it because I know that you just came from one thing and you've got something else to do. Budget 2025. There are a range of things that would have happened in that budget, apart from establishing to the country that you could stand up and talk for 5 hours easily, maybe more than that. There were some initiatives in there for the public sector in terms of an increase in people's income. There were also measures in there for the business community. And I'm wondering, because it was your 10th budget, a decade of you handling the affairs of the country, and you going into a general election in 2025, whenever it is called, what are you hoping to achieve with budget 2025?
Well, it's really a holding budget because, as I have made it very clear, the next year or two will be difficult. And then, hopefully, as the cross-border gas starts to come in from Venezuela and we can get full production in our petrochemical plants, the Atlantic LNG plant, etc., then we should get revenues back up to where they should be. So we're going to have a little difficult time for the next year or two.
A little
So
difficult
basically, the
time.
budget is difficult in terms of the ability of the government to increase expenditure. In fact, it's difficult at this point in time to maintain expenditure levels where they are. It's a challenge. I haven't had a challenge like this for a couple of years. Well, the oil price is not where it's supposed to be. It's below $70. Gas price is way down, and production is way down. Actually, we've had a little uptick in oil production recently, which is a good thing, but then oil price started to drop because there's oversupply concerns in the world. Oil price is very fickle. It moves up and down sharply depending on all sorts of things. What we're having now is an oversupply problem because inflation is a big thing in United States. And for those of your viewers who were following the US election, you would have seen that inflation was one of the major issues in that US election. And the price of gasoline, for example, is a big deal in the United States. So, what the United States is doing is producing and pumping as much oil as it possibly can so that they bring the price of oil down and bring the price of gasoline down.
Okay.
So we have a depressed oil price, we have a depressed gas price, and we have production issues. But all of that should be Very different in about 2 years.
I want you to explain a couple things because you use some terms there, and I feel people who are into finance and economics will understand it, but people who aren't into finance and economics may not. What do you mean by a holding budget? What does that mean?
Well, as I said, it's going to be difficult, if not impossible, for us to increase expenditure over the next 2 to 3 years. It's going to be difficult, and what that means is that we're going to have to try and contain things. For example, you have some trade unions asking for 20% increase. It's just out of the question. Can't do it. The 5% that was offered during the budget is going to be very hard. But I thought it was the right thing to do. But it's going to be difficult. It requires a lot of management. It's not easy managing this economy, you know. People think it's easy, but it's not. It's extremely difficult.
What are the
We've been in a
challenges? What are
situation
the
now.
things that make it
Well,
difficult?
we've been in a situation now for the last 10 years or so, I would say for the last 12, where we're running deficit budgets and also we have serious problems with cash flow. If I take you all the way back to 2010, the government's bank account at the central bank in 2010, May 2010, was in surplus, about $6 billion. So it was in credit. By the time we came in, that 6 billion had evaporated, gone to zero, and then gone to minus 9 billion. And that is the extent of the overdraft. The government is allowed to run an overdraft of 15% initially, now it's 20% of your projected revenue for the year. So you're allowed to do that. But when you hit that overdraft limit, you can't spend any more money. So we've been going through a very difficult situation, I would say, from about 2013 or so, where we are running on an overdraft and it gets up to the limit very, very quickly. For example, right now it's close to 80%. When the overdraft is at 80%, we can spend maybe just over $2 billion. Public servant salaries alone is three. So that I have to find money this month, for example, to pay public servant salary. So, and that is the story of my life for the last 10 years, 9.5 years. It's a constant grind because the country is not accustomed to this. The public servants are not accustomed to it. So they allow the overdraft to run up close to 100% and then, come screaming, and I have to deal with it. So it's a constant day-to-day management of the country's finances, and therefore you have to be very careful how you spend money. You have to manage your spending very, very carefully, but you also don't want to crash the economy. You don't want to not pay your bills and so on. It's difficult for me to explain how complex it is. It's just very hard. That's the best way I could.
Okay. Now, you talked about the fickleness of energy prices, and I know that between the pandemic to now, there have been a range of ways in which you've been attempting to assist the trade and investment aspect of governance, which I know doesn't fall under your portfolio, but because finance is so important to everything, there's been a huge thrust from your ministry to assist manufacturing. Can you fill us in a little bit more about how how your ministry has been assisting with improving the manufacturing sector and how that has helped the economy, because it was one of the things that you highlighted in budget 2025.
Well, we've been doing this since 2016. The a non-oil sector, as it is called, needs incentives. So we've done all sorts of things: tax reduction, tax concession, fiscal incentives, tax-free systems, and so on. We've assisted the manufacturing sector by giving them foreign exchange, for example, through the Exim Bank so they could buy the raw materials, buy the machinery, grow their business, and so on. And they've been doing very well. But you have to understand something. Trinidad and Tobago is an oil and gas based economy, has been since the 1970s. And therefore, it's very, very difficult to get people to move out of that sector, move out of the oil and gas sector, and get into non oil manufacturing. It's hard. It's taking time, but we're seeing tremendous growth in that sector. But it will take a very, very long time. People say all sorts of things, but they have no idea of what they're talking about. They talk about agriculture, for example. Agriculture contributes less than 1% of our GDP. Let me repeat that. It contributes less than 1% of our GDP. So if we were to double agricultural production, double it, increase by 100%, it still would be less than 2% of our GDP. So it's not a major contributor to the economy. And similarly, a lot of other sectors are not major contributors to the economy. We do have a very vibrant local manufacturing sector that is gearing up for export and is doing very, very well. But that will take a very, very long time because culturally, we are a nation of traders, importers, buy and sell. That's what a lot of businessmen have been accustomed to be doing for the last 50 years. That's what they do: import, sell. So that there's no real culture in Trinidad and Tobago for people to get involved in export manufacturing, for example. But it's growing. We've seen tremendous growth, about 25% growth in the last 3, 4 years in that area. But it will take a very, very long time.
You know that your government is going to come under some fire for the Salary Reviews Commission report that was recently laid in Parliament. What are your thoughts on the recommendations made by the report, and the are you all thinking of adopting it?
Well, Rhoda, I listened to your introduction, and all the things you said I'm going to talk about. I was quite interested because there are a lot of them I'm not going to talk about them. So that's one I'm not going to talk about. That will be debated in Parliament, and you'll hear about it then. I'm not talking about that tonight at all.
Okay,
Okay? So,
fair enough. Um, the energy sector and the imbalances in the energy sector. And of course, the United States has just had an election that is likely to impact on diplomatic policies. How concerned are you going into a, a new fiscal year as well as a general election year? How concerned are you about the performance of the energy sector and how it impacts your job? I mean,
well, we have had a reduction in production. It's been steadily declining over the last several years. And that's natural because we've been producing oil in Trinidad and Tobago for 100 years commercially. The first commercial production was in the 1920s. So it's 100 years of oil production. And when you are in a situation like that, oil is a depleting resource. So you have to keep drilling, you have to keep doing workovers, to increase production. You have to drill new wells, you have to discover new deposits of oil. And it's the same thing with gas. It's the, there are many examples of gas production where the gas production starts out at a very high level and then it drops down to a very low level very quickly. That's the nature of our geology in Trinidad and Tobago. So that because we're so old in terms of oil production, I'll take Guyana for example. Guyana has been producing oil for about 5 years. So they've gone from zero to 100,000 barrels a day to 200,000 to 300,000, that sort of thing. That's what, when you have, let's call it a virgin field. But we are not like that. We have been drilling and producing oil and gas now for 100 years. So it's a very, very difficult situation just to keep production at a constant level because you have to keep producing more just to stay afloat, to tread water. That is why the cross-border initiatives, the Laura and Manatee field, which is a field that straddles the border between Trinidad and Venezuela, and the Manikin Coquina field, a similar field straddling the border between the two countries, and the Dragon field, which is about 15 kilometers away from Chagaramas. They have so much gas over there. We're currently producing about 2.6 million cubic feet of gas per day. We really need to produce 4 because that is the capacity of all our methanol plants or ammonia plants, urea, the Atlantic LNG facility, and so on. We need about 4 million cubic feet of gas per day, 4 billion, sorry, cubic feet of gas per day. And the only way we're going to get up to that number from 2.6 billion, which it is now, to 4 billion is through gas coming from overseas. Now, the Venezuelans can't use the gas. They have no infrastructure in that area. There's no plant. There's no pipeline. There's nothing. So that gas is being burnt at this point in time. So it's a win-win for the two countries, for Trinidad and for Venezuela. So that's why we've been pushing so hard. And there is so much gas over there. There is so much. It's incredible that once we get access to it, we can get back up to 4 billion standard cubic feet of gas per day very, very quickly, and then go much further than that.
Okay.
You know, so
Now,
that is
sorry.
where the future lies. That's why we're pushing so hard for that.
Okay. Now, I just want to dip back into the, I guess, diversification question that I'd asked earlier. You talked about agriculture. You said agriculture is like around 1% GDP,
Less than 1% of
less
GDP.
than 1% GDP. So then,
Yeah,
tourism and the creative sector, those two areas, is it
very small as well. Very, very, very small. They would be, in the single digits. That's also a very small part of our gross domestic production.
and is there is there
Where
any
our gross domestic production, our GDP, is really, really focused on oil and gas and manufacturing. That's where it is.
okay,
Of course, these things will help. You see, so if you build, you see, every little bit counts. So agriculture is 0.5% of GDP now, or 0.75%, let's say. You double it, every percentage helps. Tourism might be 3% of GDP at this point in time or less. You double that, you get another 3%. Manufacturing, the non-oil sector, and you also have the services sector, financial services, and various other services. They make up more than 50% of our GDP at this point in time. Oil and gas make up about 40%, and services and manufacturing make up more than 50%. And then you have the other smaller sectors inside of there, agriculture, tourism, and so on.
okay.
So every little bit helps, and that's why we have to just keep pushing. I think there's a lot of scope in tourism, a lot of scope there. I mean, many Caribbean islands depend on tourism. We don't, but we were making some significant strides in terms of tourist arrivals over the last couple of years, and every little bit helps.
All right, Minister, I want to shift away from budget 2025 and get to, I guess, accounting within the Ministry of Finance. I didn't I didn't realize that you prepare the accounts for the Ministry of Finance.
I do not. That's a myth. I mean,
No,
let's stay with the Auditor
I'm
General.
saying it tongue in cheek, but I want you
Yeah,
to
yeah.
explain because I feel I understand it because I've been following this story. But explain to the audience the role that you play in preparing the accounts of Trinidad and Tobago.
I play no role. And that is what is so ridiculous about all of this.
So
The
then, how did you get
public accounts,
involved? How did this whole issue between
I,
you and the Auditor General become a thing?
I'll explain.
Mm-hmm.
The public accounts are prepared by the Treasury, and specifically by the Controller of Accounts, who is the most senior public servant within the Treasury. So the Treasury will submit to the Auditor General the records in terms of revenue and expenditure. And the Auditor General examines the records with respect to revenue and expenditure and simply audits them to see that all of the documentation that is required has been submitted and that everything adds up basically. The Minister of Finance doesn't get involved. I am not aware of any Minister of Finance for the last 50 years who has ever submitted a single document to the Auditor General with respect to the public accounts for any specific year. Certainly in this particular case, and certainly for the last 10 years, and all my predecessors in the modern era have had nothing to do with the submission of the public accounts. It's done by the permanent secretary in the Ministry of Finance. The central bank has a role to play because the money that comes into the country, that comes into The government's bank account has to pass through the central bank, of course. The Board of Inland Revenue has a role to play because they collect the taxes and so on. So the Board of Inland Revenue's records would be part of the documentation submitted to the Auditor General, and the central bank's records would be also part of the documentation. And then the Treasury's records, which is money in and money out, essentially. And Minister of Finance has nothing to do with it. What happened this time was that the public servants came to me in April of this year and told me that they had discovered there was an error in their documentation, not mine. And they said they had been trying to communicate with the Auditor General and they had not been successful. So they literally pleaded with me to call the Auditor General and ask for a little more time to submit their documents, which is what I did. And that's the end of that. Somehow, one of the interesting things about all of this is that the discrepancy was not detected by the Auditor General. It was detected by the members of staff in the Board of Inland Revenue, Budget Division, Treasury, Central Bank, and so on, and reported to the Auditor General. So the public servants discovered there was an error and told the Auditor General there was an error. And that's basically it. How that has turned around into me being somehow involved in submitting documents and me being somehow involved in submitting erroneous documents, I don't understand. But it is a campaign, it's a lot of mythology, it's a lot of nonsense, basically.
Okay. Is there anything new or further on the issue that you're allowed to say? Because I know right now it's still before the courts.
I don't have anything to say. As I said, the public servants pointed out to the Auditor General that there was a mistake. They tried to correct it. And this is where we are right now. My job as Minister of Finance, now I could have chosen when the Permanent Secretary came to me and begged me to call the Auditor General and ask for a few more days to put in the corrections. I could have said no. But I felt it was my duty because they were all stressed out. This is a serious matter. It reflects very seriously on them. As I said, I don't prepare any documents. So they came to me. I wouldn't say they panicked, but I would certainly say there was a lot of anxiety in the public servants because for them, this was a very, very serious matter. So I, as the minister, they came to me. They said, Minister, help. Could you just give the Auditor General a call and ask us to give a little more time to submit to her the correct documents? That is the end of it. That is the sole extent of my involvement. Nothing else.
So I guess at the point in time that the issue had blown up earlier in the year, one of my first queries was that particular office, is it allowed to refuse to accept accounting documents and accounting information?
Well, now you're getting into the realm of what is in the court.
Okay.
Again, I want to make the point. It is the public servants who submit the documents to the Auditor General, not the minister. It is the public servants who possess the records that are submitted to the Auditor General, not the minister. It is the Auditor General who decides what to do with the documents. It's as simple as that. There's no minister inside of there getting involved in any part of this. As I said, my only involvement in this was when the public servant pleaded with me. I picked up the phone, I called the Auditor General, I asked her to give them a little more time. Full stop.
Okay, all right. Well, I guess we will wait for updates from the legal matter.
Well, I'm not really getting into that anymore. I mean, that is a matter for the public servants. I want you to understand something.
Mm-hmm.
This is not my job. As I said, I don't submit the documents and I don't audit them. That's not my job. Okay, so I am leaving that up to the persons involved. You have the Auditor General does the audit and the public servants submit the documents and answer questions coming from the Auditor General's office. That is for them. I just don't know how this thing turned around into something for me.
Well, I mean, one of the accusations that was lobbed at you is that you were bullying the Auditor General. So that's why I felt I needed to understand, well, where would the interaction have taken place? Where could those allegations have come from?
That is not something I want to comment on. I told you
Gotcha.
what happened, and that's the end of it.
No, fair enough. And I understand because when matters are before the court, you really can't be discussing them. I'd like to shift gears and move on to Forex now. Now, Forex has been a big issue, but not just now. For the last 10 years, there have been a range of economic gurus, I will call them, asking you to float the dollar. So, and you have been adamant you are not floating the dollar. And I want to understand, given all of the noise about Forex and everybody clamoring about how much Forex they want to be able to have access to, why are you so adamant that you are not floating the dollar?
Well, I'd put it another way. Why are they so adamant on floating the dollar? What does floating the dollar do? If you allow it to float, which is essentially just a nice word, a nice flowery word for devalue the dollar. I don't know why they say float. What do you think it's going to go up? I mean, as I said, it's a very misleading term. What you're essentially allowing is the dollar to go into free fall. That's what I mean. Not to float, to fall. So I don't understand what their problem is. Because if you allow the dollar to go into free fall, then what is going to happen? You will not get any additional US dollars. You're getting the same amount of US dollars. So what beats me is all of these, let's call them economists. I had another word for them. All of these economists say, let it float, let it fall, and you will solve your forex problem. How? Because the quantity of US dollars coming into the system is fixed. So when you allow the dollar to fall, or float as they put it, our dollar becomes weaker. So it might go to 7 to 1, 8 to 1, 9 to 1, 10 to 1, whatever. You could look at Jamaica, for example. I remember, uh, I wonder how far to go back, but if I go back 20 years, the Jamaica dollar was like 50 to 1. It's now 150 to 1. And even as you go further back in Jamaica, the Jamaica dollar used to be on par with the US dollar. So it's gone from 1 to 1 to 150 to 1. The Guyanese dollar is 230 to 1 or something like that. So when these things happen, if you look at Jamaica, for example, Jamaica is a good example. The per capita GDP, which is the average income of a Jamaican person, is one third Trinidad. One third. So if we allow the dollar to just float or fall, what's going to happen? You get no additional US dollars, so it solves no forex crisis, but goods become much, much more expensive. So we have a huge food import bill, for example. We currently spend about $7 billion importing food. So if you allow the dollar to go to 10 to 1, we now spend $10 billion
7
importing food.
billion US dollars in food?
TT dollars.
7 billion
7 billion TT
TT
dollars every
dollars.
year
Okay,
importing
right. So 7 billion
importing food.
TT dollars in
So
food.
if
That's
you allow,
annually.
yeah,
Right.
you allow the dollar to slide, the price of food is going to go up by 30 to 40% right away. Might even go up by 50% because most of our food is imported, and we don't grow wheat here. We don't make cheese here. We don't make flour here. I mean, we have to import all of these things. We don't have any great production of beef or anything like that. So most of the food that we consume has to be imported. So the first thing that would happen if I listen to these characters, and I say, no problem, let's float it. The first thing that will happen, the price of food might go up by 50%. Then what do you get? The trade unions will come quite justifiably and say the cost of living just went up by 25, 30%. So we want a 25, 30% increase in wages. Who's going to pay for that? Where's that money going to come from? So that there is no way I am going to allow myself to be bullied by these people to do something stupid, which is to let our dollar depreciate and make life so much harder for everybody in Trinidad and Tobago. And the only people that could possibly benefit from a devaluation or a flotation, as they call it, is people who have large amounts of US dollars hoarding somewhere overseas. So I just won't do it because the people who will suffer from that will be the poor and the middle class. The wealthy people can always find a way to survive, but people in the middle and people at the lower end are going to suffer. So I just won't do it. It doesn't matter how many editorials they write, how many go-to commentators they talk to, how many times I look on the front page and I see float the dollar. They could keep doing that for the next 100 years. I will not do it because it is going to cause pain and suffering to poor and middle class people in this country.
All right, so we know who's going to suffer from a dollar floating. Who's going to benefit?
People who have large amounts of US dollars. Because I'll give you an example. Let's say you have 10 million US dollars somewhere in a bank account. Currently, you could get, say, let's round it off. You'll get 70 million TT for that. If I allow the dollar to go to 10 to 1, that person just made 30 million Trinidad dollars because they now have $100 million worth. And things will not keep pace. Wages will not keep pace with the devaluation. It'll take a while before things catch up with the devaluation. So the person who just made $30 million able to use that to acquire goods and services and really have a very good time.
Somebody's asking if this $7 billion includes alcohol. Does it include the cost of importing alcohol in it?
I'm not sure. I know it's food.
Okay.
I'm not sure if alcohol is included in food.
All right. Moving back to the...
I mean, there's obviously something I could check. And what I would tell you, Rhoda, is if there's a question I cannot answer, I mean, I know you're recording this thing. We will take a note of all the questions that I don't have an answer at my fingertips, and I will get the answer.
Yeah, I am taking a note of the things that we would need to follow up on, or I would need to follow up on with you on this matter. So we've talked about who will not benefit from a float. We've talked about who will benefit from a float. You've indicated that, and we're not here tonight, but in other spaces, you've indicated that you put about $100 million a month US into the system. Well, the Ministry of Finance via the central bank. Am I correct?
Actually, it's much more than that.
How much more than that?
If you take the Exim Bank facility, which is for essential imports and for export manufacturers, also have another window for state enterprises. So you have like TNTech and so on, will need to buy equipment and machinery all the time. So WASA has the same problem. They have to buy essential parts and equipment all the time and machinery, and it has to come from abroad. So all of these state enterprises who deliver things like TNTech and WASA and so on, they need foreign exchange all the time. So we have another window just for them. So we have a Forex window for state enterprises involved in delivering basic services. They apply and we have a certain fund and we give them the Forex that they need so that they don't only go to the commercial banking sector. They get money from the state for their essential imports. Then Exim Bank, as I said, you have,
Let me understand this properly. About 100 million gets distributed to the commercial banks, and then there is a separate amount that
another 100 million.
Another 100 million that goes to the Exim Bank.
So we put 200 million US into the system every month.
So 200 million US goes into the system every month to be able to service commercial clients, so commercial bank clients, Exim Bank clients, and then state clients.
State enterprises.
State enterprises.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Good. So that is, me and Matt's ain't so hot. 12 twos are 24.
$2.4 billion US dollars a year.
So $2.4 billion US dollars a year. So here's my question. What's that money being spent on? Like, how is it being spent? Today I saw in the newspapers
2.4.
cars, right? So the 2.4, if you had to give me a sense of what the $2.4 billion annually being spent on, what is it being spent on?
We have to understand the whole equation.
Uh-huh.
The total amount of US dollars circulating in the banking system available for persons to get access is $7 billion. So the government puts in 2.4 and the banks purchase another 4.6 from various, like a petrochemical company would need to pay its salaries to its local staff and so on, or buy local goods and services. So they will convert, because all of the energy sector companies, they earn US dollars. Their products are not sold in Trinidad, they're sold overseas. So that the commercial banks also acquire about $4.6 billion. All of the licensed dealers, let's not limit it to commercial banks, but all of the licensed dealers in foreign exchange, they convert about 4.6 billion. We put in about 2.4 billion. Within that 2.4 billion, a significant amount, I would say somewhere in the vicinity of 500 million goes through the Exim Bank, and that is very carefully managed. That is given to importers of essential products, the same items I mentioned just now: flour, cheese, meat, essential imports, and also pharmaceuticals. And in addition to that, the export manufacturers also receive part of that 500 million that goes to the Exim Bank on an annual basis. The other 500 million goes to the state enterprises, and then the central bank puts in $1.2 billion into the commercial banks. The commercial banks then sell that 1.2 billion to their customers in a manner that is really creating some issues, because that's the problem right now. They just, for the last, I would say, 20 years, the central bank has given this money to the commercial banks and told them that they have to focus on trade, so that the primary use of this money is for trade. What I did some years ago was to add two more categories: medical expenses and tuition expenses. So that's the sort of the prioritization. Trade means all business, okay? And then you add medical, and then you add tuition, overseas tuition, and so on. But we don't manage them. Like, for example, I don't, as I said before, I don't have a set of US dollars in a drawer by the Ministry of Finance, and somebody comes and applies to me and says, look, they need Forex to go on vacation, for example. That's not done by me. The central bank puts the money in, gives the banks these criteria, and then the banks distribute the money. And I think this is where the problem is coming from. People are not satisfied that the distribution is fair. Coming back to the cars, some of that forex would be from what the government puts in, and the rest of it would be from the $4.6 billion US that is purchased by the commercial banks from the private sector. Okay,
Right.
I don't know
S-
if
s-
I'm making
So,
myself clear.
right. So now I know where the money is coming from. Now I'm seeing we talked about the food import bill. I'm seeing in the newspapers today stories about forex being spent on cars. You've talked about
Mm-hmm,
essentials, so food and
mm-hmm.
medicine and health, um, stuff for health. I would imagine there's also a fair amount of importation of products for construction purposes.
Mm-hmm.
Am I
Yes,
correct? Good.
of course.
So, in a situation where we're seeing forex being spent
All of that
on.
falls under trade, eh? The, the,
Mhm.
the importation of construction materials falls under trade.
I know that these things don't
Okay?
fall directly under your line ministry. I know that you are
No, no, no,
responsible.
no, no. No, no. When the central bank puts its money in, which is really the government's forex, it tells the banks priority number one is commerce. I'm calling it trade.
Oh,
Okay? So priority number one is business.
right.
Priority number two is medical expenses. Priority number three is tuition expenses for overseas study. So that's the trade. That's what I mean when I say trade. I should
Oh,
use the word
so
commerce.
commercial interests first, health interests
Yes.
next, education third, and then
Yes.
anything else after.
Everything else after that. Yes.
Okay, right. Can the government put restrictions on the importation of items? I know that it can,
Of
from a
course.
legislative
Of
point of
course.
view.
But I read that story about the cars, and I mean, Trinidad is such a strange place. If the government were to ban the importation of cars, the same newspaper that ran the screaming headlines about cars are using up 400 million in Forex every year, and people are buying 25,000 cars a year, or whatever the number is. If we were to say, all right, that is not a priority, that is zero priority, we are banning the importation of cars for the next 2 years to save that. So we'll save 800 million US and take that 800 million US now and distribute it in a different way, to people who are clamoring for a better distribution system. What would happen? This same group would be screaming at the government, would be screaming at me for being so wicked as to ban the importation of cars. You follow? And you
I
have
do
people
follow.
like the used car dealers quarreling all the time that they're not getting enough foreign exchange to import cars. So we live in a very paradoxical, schizophrenic, quixotic society. Because on the one hand, you have a whole set of people making a set of noise that they're not getting enough forex to import cars. And then today you have a daily newspaper screaming about cars using up forex. And as I said, if we were to ban cars, you could imagine the bacchanal that would ensue from that.
Would
But how does
the,
one deal with this?
well, so Minister, I wasn't thinking of it so much as ban cars, but I wondered because you see, I wasn't just thinking about the cars. Couple weeks ago, maybe more than a week, more than a couple weeks, because this would have been around the end of October. I saw imported pumpkins, right, for the purpose of decorations for Halloween, and I didn't realize that Halloween was such a big deal in Trinidad and Tobago that we had gotten to the point where we importing pumpkins. You've had budgets in the past where you've imposed higher duties on luxury goods, luxury items. But I was wondering, given the kind of congestion we have on our roads, given our need to conserve things like Forex, and even us signing on in terms of carbon emissions, would would thinking about reducing the number of vehicles imported into the country be something that could be up for consideration?
Well, there's already a quota system for foreign use cars. That is already in place. It is this government that put that in. The previous government had a free for all.
I
They
didn't
had
know
no
that.
quota.
What
You
is the
just
quota?
whatever you want, bring the car you want. 10. I'm not sure what the amount is.
Okay.
I'm not exactly sure how much it is. But the Ministry of Trade issues licenses, and each dealer is allowed to import a certain amount of cars based on certain criteria. So I can't tell if it's 1,000 cars or 2,000 cars or 5,000 foreign used cars that could come in. But the point is, there's already a quota system restricting the importation of foreign used vehicles. That is a perennial shouting match and screaming match between the used car importers and the Ministry of Trade. It's a huge fight that the used car importers say this is wrong. They should be allowed to import as many vehicles as they're interesting, because it has become uh, an objective of many people in Trinidad and Tobago, many families and so on, to own a car. And in fact, now I can give you an example of my own constituency. 30 years ago, I could have driven from Maraval to Pity Valley over the Montcoco Road, and I would not meet a single car parked on it. I have to keep stopping because there are hundreds of cars parked on the side of the road, on the Montcoco Road, belonging to the residents there, because they have two cars, and some of them have three cars, and so on. It is an objective of families in Trinidad and Tobago to own cars. If you look at the roads, for example, you look at traffic in the morning, how many people are in each car? One. Look at a traffic jam and you look inside the cars, you see one person. So it's a cultural thing. So that it's very easy for people who have no responsibility, who don't have to deal with any, to say, we should stop the importation of cars, or we should make it more difficult for people to import cars. You then get the screaming and the shouting and the pushback from another group who will say that's not fair. They have a right to import a car and own a car because you're restricting their ability to advance themselves. So it's very, very complex. What we can do is increase duties, we could increase taxes, and the same set of screaming will continue. What are you doing that for? You're making the acquisition of a car difficult for the poor man. So a lot of people say a lot of things, but they don't think it through and they have no responsibility. Tomorrow morning, we could decide to increase duties and taxes on cars to suppress demand. We could do that tomorrow. But what would be the consequence of that? How are we going to counter the argument that we are depriving people of the opportunity to have their own means of transportation?
Fair enough. So,
Now,
mhm.
coming back to your pumpkins, I don't know where that person got. No, coming back here. Are you hearing me? Are you hearing me, Rhoda?
Yes, I
Coming back to
am.
your pumpkin. I don't know where that person got that Forex to buy those pumpkins. Maybe they use their credit card because there's something very odd happening with credit cards now. People are traveling abroad and using the cash advance facility. So I have heard of entities, a small business, they would get every one of their employees to get a personal credit card, 10 cards, 20 cards, whatever. The owner would then control all these 20 cards and send somebody, one person to Miami with all 20 cards, with all the PIN numbers. You have a cash advance. You could take out 2,000 US a day. In 3 days, they draw the whole $5,000 limit. They come back with 100,000 US in cash. Maybe that's how the pumpkins came in. I don't know, but I seriously doubt that the money that the government is putting into the commercial banking system is for Halloween pumpkins. I am sure that person is using some other imaginative means and probably using a credit card to do that. Now, there has been already a suggestion to suppress demand by putting high taxes on luxury items and or non-essential. And certainly something like that would be a non-essential. But it's a very complicated thing. It's not something you can just dive into just so. Because everything that you would seek to restrict and make more expensive, some element is going to push back at you. You have to be very careful.
So the issue of people going abroad and drawing down on their credit cards and taking the Forex and possibly hoarding the Forex, banking it elsewhere,
No,
or
I would think it's selling it on the black market, some of them.
right, right. So
So somebody
hoarding,
goes abroad,
banking it elsewhere, or
accumulates 100,000 US, comes back and sells it
right, or
at
selling on the
801
black
in Africa.
market. What, if anything,
Yeah.
can the government do about that? Like, are there any restrictions you all can put in place?
The government has nothing to do with credit cards. That's the other thing that I find amazing. We don't run the banks. We don't make policy for the banks. We don't decide what the credit limit should be in the banks. We don't own the banks except for FCB. So that we can't tell a bank what to do with it. And the problem with credit cards is credit cards are the first call on foreign exchange. If banks do not remit to MasterCard or Visa and so on the US dollars that they owe because people are purchasing things on Amazon or whatever, Visa will cancel all the arrangements with Trinidad and Tobago and all cards done. So that banks have to reserve Forex as first call on settling credit card liabilities. And you're talking 2 to 2.5 billion US dollars a year in credit cards. It's not small change. 1/3 of the forex circulating in the banking system is in credit card transaction. 1/3. Now
So,
we can't tell the banks what to do. What the banks are doing is they're managing the situation. Because if the number of cards has gone up by 30% or 40% over the last 4 5 years, the number of cards, and if the spend on the cards has gone up by 30 or 40% over the last 4 5 years or so, the banks only have a limited amount of foreign exchange. It's ironic, eh? They're promoting the cards, they're having big marketing programs to encourage people to get credit cards, and then the very said credit cards create the problem for the banks because they have to remit their precious forex for credit card purchases as the first call on forex. But we can't tell them what to do.
well, that sounds like a very vicious cycle there, Minister, because you've got banks
Yeah,
issuing more credit cards, people now having more credit cards. There's still being a limited amount of Forex, and the credit cards have to be honored because, of course, people are
yeah,
shopping. I mean, with the
yeah,
pandemic, more online shopping has been taking place. I want to stick
yeah.
with the banking issue, and I mean, if this doesn't fall within your remit, of course, let me know. But there have been people in the last couple of weeks raising questions about if they've got a US account here and they deposit money into that US account, they have problems withdrawing money from that US account that they have here in a local bank. And they're wondering, well, why are there those restrictions? Why do they have to get permission from the bank to be able to draw down on their account?
And they're asking me to answer that question. I don't, I don't know these banks. I mean, the amount of things that the Minister of Finance is supposed to be able to do by just waving a magic wand, and Shazam, and the banks will say, "All right, look, come for U.S. cash." That is not a government thing. That is a commercial banking thing. But what I would say, as by way of explanation, is that banks don't keep large quantities of U.S. cash. They don't hoard it and they don't have it in a vault. When people come in and they bring in US dollar cash, which would not be in any large quantities anyway, because the people who earn US dollar cash in Trinidad, the taxi drivers, the people in the hotels and so on, they are not going to go and deposit that in the commercial banking sector. They're going to keep it. But there is some cash coming in. But the banks don't keep it. They remit it to the central bank right away, or they send it back to their correspondent banks in the United States. They just don't keep foreign exchange cash here. So that you have a Forex account, you have a US dollar account in Trinidad. If you want to get a wire, for example, let's say you have a US dollar account and you have 20,000 US in that account, you're a businessman, and you want to purchase something. If you go to the bank and say, I'd like you to wire 5,000 US to my supplier in Miami, they will do it right away. Or I would like to get a manager's check in US dollars for 5,000. I'd like to go up to Miami and buy. You could do that right away. But in terms of cash, this cash is simply not present in the commercial bank. You follow?
Yeah, I do. I follow. It makes sense. It adds up.
It's
Um,
not accurate for people to say that they can't get access to the US dollars that they have in their US dollar accounts in Trinidad. It is more accurate to say is that they can't get large quantities of cash from their US dollar accounts here. But I do know that if you want a wire transfer or you want a manager's check, you could get that same. Okay.
okay. All right. We're close to time. I know that I only have you for about 5 more minutes. So, your plans, your political plans, your political future. You have been an MP for what now? 30 years? About?
33.
33.
3-3.
3-3? So you're coming close to your 33 and a
Yeah.
third. Are you looking at retirement?
I'm not a public servant. So 33 and a third has no significance for me.
But
No, I plan to go one
MP
more.
don't mean public servant in a sense?
Well, it looks so. But I plan to offer myself for the next general election, but that will be my last one
Okay,
from
so you're thinking
2025 to
you're thinking of going
2030.
back up for another term.
Last lap.
Last lap. I hear you. I hear you. I hear that. And given that you're calling it your last lap
The
and saying that
reason being The
Yes.
reason being,
Mm-hmm.
I saw some in an editorial. You know, these editorials, they always so, what shall I say, pernicious and always have a little nasty twist in them. Eh?
Mm-hmm.
These editorials. But there's something make me laugh one day. They were trying to choke me to say something because you realize I have said nothing about things happening in the PNM over the last 2 years. Yeah, you can't get a word out of me. And if
Mm-hmm.
you try tonight, you will fail. You will get nothing out of me.
Oh,
But
I
I saw this little nasty twist there.
I have
No, I'm just
no
saying you will get nothing out of me, so don't try.
I am not trying to get anything out of you, especially not with respect to the whole leadership question within the your party. What I am interested in,
No, Rhoda, I was going on to say something. I was going
sure.
on to say something. So I've just given you a caution that if you ask me that, I wouldn't answer it.
Mm-hmm.
So, because I'm sure your listeners want to know, but they're
They
not going to.
want to
They're
know,
going
they're
to be
dying
sorely
to know.
disappointed. They
They're
will.
dying
They
to
will be
know.
sorely disappointed. I have said nothing about PNM for the last 2 years, and will say nothing about PNM internal matters for the next 20 years. But I saw in an editorial that made me laugh that I still have gas in the tank. Well, I think I do. I think the brain is still working, and I think they, have good health. So that's why I say I'll go for it for another 5 years, and that's it. After that, hand over to the younger
All
generation.
right. So you're considering putting yourself up for another 5 years. If you are given the
Not
opportunity,
considering, I am offering myself to be nominated. I'm not considering. That's a foregone conclusion.
okay. So let's say you're nominated, right?
I'm offering myself for selection.
Right. So
Yes.
let's say you are selected to run as MP again. What
Hmm.
would you like to get done in that 5 year period?
The next five?
Yeah, the next five.
Well, I certainly would like to get some things done in my constituency that I've been working on for a very long time. I still have a few things to do. Okay.
And
I
you don't
still
want
have
to tell
some
me what
big
those few things
constituency
are?
projects. Oh, definitely. I want to complete the widening of the entrance into Maraval from Cape Up all the way up to, Valleton Road. We started it. We're building a bridge right now. If you travel to Maraval, you'll see the bridge by Royal Bank, by Bossier Village, is being widened. A lot of people don't know what that is, but what it is widening the bridge to make it a four-lane bridge. That's essential in order to have proper traffic flow in and out of Maraval. And then the plan is to put a roundabout down at the other end of the Rapsy Street intersection, where there's that gas station there. The plan there is to put a roundabout. So you'll have all these four lanes coming all the way from Cape Walk all the way down into, the middle of Maraval. So that's something I have to do. And then many other things like that. There's a lot being done, but I'm not sure I have any more community centers to do. But I've been around for 33 years, so I have been able to get community centers built in the areas that I thought was necessary, like City Valley and Bellevue, D-Bay, and that sort of thing. Bagatelle, areas, depressed areas that need help. I have been able to get brand new community centers built there over the years. So there are things I want to do as an MP. And
Okay.
then what I'd like to do as well, it's a perennial problem with particularly young men in the constituency. There's a real difficulty in terms of opportunity for young men. You find a lot of young men and young women too. They don't finish school. They have no formal education, and they find it very difficult to get employment. So that's something I'd like to focus on in my last term as well, so I could deal with that properly. In terms of government, there isn't much left for me to do. I think I've done most everything I need to do.
Well, so then
Okay.
my final question. It's been 10 years as Minister of Finance, a portfolio that I'm quite certain was not an easy portfolio to manage for 10 years. You have people that don't like you as Minister of Finance, you have people that do like you as Minister of Finance. Where do you see yourself and your performance of the last 10 years as Minister of Finance?
Now, opposition MP, who I don't really take on too seriously. Recently, in a sort of across the floor bit of old talk, I told him, well, he was heckling me. So I said, well, you'll get your chance next year. You could be Minister of Finance. Okay? She said, not me, I don't want it. So I said, why you don't want it? He said, that's a poison chalice. I said, what do you mean by that? He said, no, that job too hard. So that is the problem with being Minister of Finance. It is not as if I have an overflowing cup of money that I can just share out like that. The country is living beyond its means. There's no two ways about it. We are spending more than we earn. It's very, very difficult. So decisions have to be made to reduce expenditure, to reduce subsidies, for example. And people don't like it. So that you will find that there are people who just focus on that there's a reduction in expenditure, or they didn't get the kind of wage increase they wanted, or the price of fuel has gone up, and so on. These are things that we have to do. So that causes negativity. I understand that. It's not an easy job. I remember Dr. Rowley in 2020 talking about, who he was going to continue with in the cabinet, and he put me in as Minister of Finance, and he gave the reason why. He said, he has a lot of advice as to who should be the Minister of Finance, but it is not a job for the faint-hearted. So that you have to take difficult positions, and people will not like you for that. But on the other hand, I think genuinely there are a tremendous amount of people who appreciate the hard work that I have put in. I get that all the time. People come up to me all the time in the street, wherever I go, to supermarket, gas station, wherever I go. Because I go all about by myself. I don't have any security. I drive myself. People are quite shocked to see me walking through. Last time I went to visit some friends in a restaurant in Movie Town, and I just walking through the crowd. There was a flea market there, and people just, hey, where's this man's security? I don't have it. So I have people coming up to me all the time saying, thank you for your service. Thank you for all the hard work that you've done over the last 10 years, and that makes it worth it.
Okay, all right, and there we have it. Minister, thank you very much for the time this evening, and I am not going to keep you back from your other commitments, and I'm sure the comment thread here is from people. They're saying, you've managed and performed very well, we appreciate you, etc., etc. So thank you very much for the time, Minister.
You sure that's what they're saying?
It is there on the comment thread.
All right.
Have a good evening.
Have a nice night. Okay, bye-bye. All right, then.
And there you have it, folks. I am hopeful that you all were able to hear the entire discussion, and you were able to understand a lot of what was being said. And of course, if you have any questions, you can post it on the thread, both on YouTube and on Facebook, if you've got any follow-up questions, and I will pass them on to the minister. Of course, it has to be related to his responsibilities, and I'll see how best I can get responses for you all. Okay, have yourselves a very good evening. Next week Sunday we're likely to have the Minister of Public Utilities here, because I have reached out to his office to ask if he is available, and there's every possibility that we will be able to have a conversation about lights, electricity, phone connections here. Okay, so I will see you guys next week Sunday evening. Thank you so much for joining me.